second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Firstpost reports from the world's second largest continent. Hello, I'm Alyson Grange. A very warm welcome from Durban, South Africa. We get you the news and the newsmakers from Africa. South Africa goes to the polls on the 29th of May. I will track the election and bring you ground reports. Is it the end of the road for the African National Congress? And will former President Jacob Zuma stage a dramatic comeback? From elections to climate change to innovations and opportunities. As the world's attention shifts, we report from Africa, the heart of the global South. Join me every weekday live on First Post. Hello and welcome to First Post Africa, where we get you the top stories from the continent and from across the world. I'm Alyson Grange, coming to you live from Durban, South Africa. First, let's take a look at the headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin says capturing Kharkiv is not a part of Russia's objective, with the forces advancing further only to create a buffer zone to protect the border regions. North Korea fires multiple suspected short-range ballistic missiles hours after leader Kim Jong-un's sister denies allegations that Pyongyang is shipping weapons to Russia. Lawmakers in Taiwan's parliament come to blows in a bitter dispute over reforms to the chamber. This comes just days before President-elect Lai Ching-te takes office. Senegal's Prime Minister questions the military presence of former colonial ruler France, which has multiple bases in the West African nation, saying it affects Dakar's sovereignty. And a severe storm pummels Houston, killing at least 4 people and knocking out power to nearly 1 million homes and businesses in southeast Texas. Hello and welcome. We begin with the latest from The Hague, where South Africa is confronting Israel at the International Court of Justice over Israel's war in Gaza. South Africa has asked Israel to stop the carnage in Gaza, accusing the country of stepping up what Pretoria called a genocide in the Palestinian enclave.
When we last appeared before this court to halt this genocidal process, to preserve Palestine and its people. Instead, Israel's genocide has continued apace and has just reached a new and horrific stage. Israel has sought to hide its crimes through the weaponization of international humanitarian law. It pretends that the civilians it ruthlessly kills through its 2,000-pound bombs, through its targeted airstrikes, through its artificial intelligence systems, through its executions, are human shields. This whitewashing of Israel's genocide misses the key and fundamental element, that of the massive and still mounting evidence of Israel's genocidal intent.
South Africa urged judges at the top UN court to order a halt on Israel's assault on Rafah, adding that Israel must immediately, totally and unconditionally stop from the war in the Strip. Now, South Africa told the World Court that a destructive campaign in Rafah would destroy the foundation of Palestinian life in the territory.
The key point today is that Israel's declared aim of wiping Gaza from the map is about to be realized. Further, evidence of appalling crimes and atrocities is literally being destroyed and bulldozed, in effect wiping the slate clean for those who've committed these crimes and making a mockery of justice.
Responding to the allegations, Israel has said that South Africa was presenting biased and false claims. It also accused South Africa of presenting a case based on unreliable Hamas sources. Israel called on the ICJ to reject South Africa's appeal, which it said was completely divorced from the facts and circumstances. Israel accused South Africa of making a mockery of the heinous charge of genocide. Justifying its operation in Rafah, Israel said the city is a focal point for ongoing terrorist activity and is a Hamas stronghold. A heckler also interrupted proceedings at the World Court as Israeli officials asked judges to dismiss South Africa's request.
South Africa presents the court yet again, for the fourth time within the scope of less than 5 months, with a picture that is completely divorced from the facts and circumstances. Israel is engaged in a difficult and tragic armed conflict. South Africa ignores this factual context, which is essential in order to comprehend the situation, and also ignores the applicable legal framework of international humanitarian law. It makes a mockery of the heinous charge of genocide.
The hearings at the World Court are a part of a case brought by South Africa accusing Israel of genocide. South Africa wants the ICJ to issue 3 emergency orders, while it rules on the wider accusation that Israel is breaking the 1948 UN Genocide Convention. 1, it wants the court to order Israel to immediately withdraw and cease the military operations in Rafah, where over 1 million displaced Palestinians have been sheltering. 2, Israel should take all effective measures to allow unimpeded access to Gaza for humanitarian aid workers, journalists and investigators. And lastly, Pretoria asked the court to ensure Israel reports back on its measures taken. Now, in January, the ICJ ordered Israel to do everything to prevent genocidal acts and enable humanitarian aid to Gaza. But the court stopped short of ordering a ceasefire. And South Africa's argument is that the situation now requires fresh action by the ICJ, especially on Israel's operation in Rafah. The United States, Israel's top ally, has strongly opposed the South African case. Washington has maintained that it does not believe what is happening in Gaza is genocide and that such claims are unwarranted and false. Now, for more on this, a fight at the top UN court, we are being joined by Dr. Andre Thomas-Hausen, who is a Professor Emeritus of International Law at the University of South Africa, who is joining us live from Pretoria. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Now, Israel has said that South Africa's case is totally divorced from reality. How do you see Israel's response at the World Court?
Well, I think you've already sketched what happened yesterday and today very well in your summaries. There is a bit of a tit for tat. He said, I said, she said, and it is very difficult for the court now to make sense of it all, because South Africa presented essentially what is called hearsay evidence, things that South Africa's legal counsel have read on the internet or heard on the news, and Israel criticized them exactly for that they took unverified reports, biased reports, they lifted information from Hamas propaganda sites, and they did not furnish any evidence. In particular, for instance, they argued that essential border posts in the south to Egypt had been closed in anticipation of the military activities there. But Israel was able to show the court that this is simply not true. They're open, and hourly there are trucks crossing those border posts. So this makes the South African case a bit weak, because if in front of a very high court you are caught out once to have been misleading or to have overstated your case, then of course your credibility generally will be affected. So the Israeli argument today was essentially South Africa has dramatized and has exaggerated its accusations.
Right. And Doctor, though South Africa has received some support from countries including Turkey, Jordan, Egypt, and the Arab League and the OIC, Israel's biggest ally, the United States, has strongly opposed the South African case. Other countries in the West have also refrained from backing South Africa's case. Do you think that it exposes the West's duplicity on Gaza?
Well, surely Hamas and their friends, and also maybe South Africa, would make this accusation. But I don't see a case for duplicity, because Europe, by and large, and the United States and Canada and Australia, and I believe also India, do recognize the right to self-defense, and they also recognize the reality, the undeniable reality, that there are daily further military aggressions from Hamas units out of Gaza against civilian targets in Israel. Even today, a barrage of missiles were fired. Most of these missiles, fortunately, are intercepted by Israel's very advanced air defense systems, but some of them do get through and cause damage and kill children and kill civilians, just like there was a terrible slaughter of civilians at the onset of this terrible war on the 7th of October last year. So the right of self-defense of Israel needs to be taken into account. It needs to be acknowledged whilst there is a continuing act of aggression by Hamas. And that actually continues also for as long as there are hostages. The taking of hostages is a severe war crime under the relevant Geneva Conventions that are also binding on Hamas. So these great powers, and probably there's acquiescence by China as well, and definitely by other new BRICS members, such as Saudi Arabia and Egypt, they make it difficult to move forward on this issue. And maybe all parties involved, but especially South Africa, should understand that the court, the International Court of Justice, wasn't established, it wasn't designed to intervene in a situation of an active and escalating war.
Now, Doctor, the orders of the International Court of Justice are legally binding, but it has little means to enforce them. It has ordered Russia to halt its invasion of Ukraine, but to no avail. Do you think an order asking Israel to stop its offensive in Rafah would make any significant difference to the ongoing situation?
Well, I call it South Africa's judicial activism. And so far, it has not saved a single life in Gaza. And unfortunately, I believe that also in future, it will not save a single life, because these proceedings before the court, they were originally designed to adjudicate differences and conflicting interests between states, but not wars. For the war situation, we have Chapter 7 of the United Nations Charter, where the United Nations can adopt peacekeeping measures. It can, for instance, establish a United Nations military command, as they did in the Korean War, the war between North and South Korea. At that time, in 1950, 22 nations participated and offered the United Nations their military support and established a corridor, a peacekeeping corridor. This is a very normal human reaction to conflict. If there are aggressive schoolboys in a break that are throwing stones at each other, obviously the teachers will have to separate them and will have to intervene and stop the stone throwing. And this is exactly what the United Nations Security Council should do and could do under Chapter 7. And that is, I think, what the big nations in this world should begin to consider and probably try to come on an understanding about this. It will be the only way to save lives in Gaza.
Yeah. Doctor, thank you very much for being with us on Firstpost Africa and for your valued insights on this story.
Thank you. Good afternoon, listeners.
We will bring you all the election updates. Staying with South Africa, the political race in the country is intensifying as it heads to provincial and general elections on the 29th of May. The upcoming election is a major test for President Cyril Ramaphosa and the African National Congress. Now, waning support for the African National Congress could force the party to form a coalition government for the first time since the end of apartheid. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Zwakele Mswango, the KwaZulu-Natal provincial chairperson for ActionSA. Now, the party says it will stand as opposition, but will not back the African National Congress. ActionSA is also urging other opposition parties to not join hands with the ANC. Taking a jibe at the ANC over corruption, the ActionSA leader also says it is time to elect ethical leaders who will save South Africa. Take a look at this exclusive conversation.
Anyone, when you go to a fight, you go for a win. But as ActionSA, we are realistic in saying, look, there is high possibility of having a multi-party government formed in South Africa and other provinces, in the main Gauteng and KZN nationally. So as ActionSA, we started to embark on a process of engaging other parties And that's how a multi-party charter was formed. And that is why ActionSA have been part of that charter from the beginning. It's now public knowledge that we are working or engaging with other parties. We've got an agreement anyway now. So it's a given that we have acknowledged the reality of coalition arrangements. That is why we've got an agreement. But what we've done to say, how do we change a scenario where we don't end up having conflict when we discuss coalition? We agreed to say, look, we come from different parties, we have different ideologies, got different values, but they can be common principles. Can we check what is common? What exactly are we fighting for together that we believe we can do together? We are clear in saying we need to start by electing ethical leaders, because you need people who are going to get to power not for their own self-interest, but to save this country. You must prioritize the health care system, being provided quality healthcare system, and education. It must be quality education. That is why, for example, we reject NHI, because NHI is a shortcut. Basically, it's going to make our country live in real poverty. Because, for example, it's not addressing this problem that I'm talking about. Government should be investing resources in those rural clinics where poor people are residing. Because bottom line is, what you are saying, you are fooling people, because someone in Wahlabisa or Nongoma to attend to a private hospital, as government claim that now you can go there, it's 300 kilometers to come here. Now, I have a hospital which is 2 kilometers away from me. You are telling me I must leave this hospital because you can't provide me or us in our area with doctors, nurses, and providers with quality healthcare system where we are. Because there are hospitals, there are clinics. Why can't you provide people with quality healthcare system that is provided by private sector? Yeah. Do the same thing for our people. All of the legislation says we can't accept this shortcut by government trying to deviate from a responsibility. None of us will entertain a coalition with the ANC, because we are saying to the people, vote for this block of parties to unseat the ANC. So it will be unethical for any party to move around back doors and engage the ANC to bring them back to power. So that is why you'll find that we keep arguing with the DA, because there's this tone of the DA saying, no, we are prepared to work with the ANC if the charter don't get 51/50+1 to block the EFF. We are saying, no. But this is not what we agreed on, But we're still engaging with the DA. So look, you can't backtrack now and say you are prepared to save the ANC to block the EFF. We are saying, as ActionSA, we remain opposition. If we can't get to power, we rather be opposition. But we can't sell voters by giving ANC back to power.
From South Africa, let's shift focus now to Mozambique, where the northern province of Cabo Delgado continues to remain on edge due to Islamist insurgency. A latest report by advocacy group Human Rights Watch tells horrifying tales from the insurgency-hit region. Last week, Macomia, a town in Cabo Delgado, was attacked by Islamist insurgents. Hundreds of fighters are believed to have been part of this attack. Now, according to the report, these fighters included children as young as 13. Al-Shabaab, an Islamic State affiliate, used young boys in its attack last week, who were seen by witnesses carrying AK-style assault rifles and ammunition belts. Residents who were forced to flee the fighting recognized some of the child soldiers as their missing relatives. The attack lasted for 24 hours, and Al-Shabaab fighters looted shops and warehouses for food. There was a major exchange of fire between the Islamist fighters and Mozambican and South African soldiers. At least 10 people were killed in the latest fighting, and 700 were forced to flee their homes into a nearby forest to escape the attacks. Al-Shabaab has been accused by the United Nations agencies of kidnapping children and using them as soldiers in fighting, which began in 2017. In March, at least 70 children were reported missing in a surge of attacks by insurgents. But the issue of child soldiers is not unique to Mozambique. Now, many other African countries such as Uganda, Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Sierra Leone, Congo, and Algeria have used young combatants during wars as child soldiers, young boys and girls suffer extensive and unbearable forms of exploitation and violence. How do these children become a part of an armed force? Well, many of them are abducted. They're taken away from school, their homes, and from the streets. They are then threatened, coerced, and manipulated, and then forced into training. Others are driven by poverty, compelled to generate money for their families. The Sahel, West Africa, and Central Africa are identified as the epicenter of child soldier recruitment. According to a UN report, the children of West and Central Africa who are trapped in conflicts are the most recruited by armed groups. They also have the highest number of victims of sexual violence. Recruiting children under the age of 15 is a war crime under international law. Children in conflict states face the serious threat of recruitment, not just by non-state actors, but also the state. Despite local and international efforts to combat the practice, it remains a frequent occurrence, especially in Africa. It is the world's youngest continent with roughly 40% of the population aged 15 or under. So children in Africa are extremely vulnerable to recruitment into armed groups, which coincides with increasing levels of violence in several countries in the continent. Moving to Tunisia, facing growing dissent and violent protests across the country, Tunisian President Kais Saied has made claims of foreign interference. The Tunisian leader has been facing severe international backlash over a wave of arrests targeting journalists, lawyers, and activists. Hundreds gathered in the country's capital, Tunis, in protest against the president. For the second time in a week, lawyers have launched a one-day nationwide strike. The protests are against recent arrests and alleged abuse of two lawyers, Mahdi Zagrouba and Sonia Damani. Now, on the 13th of May, Zagrouba was arrested after police stormed the Bar Association's headquarters. A second such arrest within the week. The Bar Association and human rights groups have said that Zagrouba was likely tortured during his detention. Some said that obvious traces of violence and torture were visible on Zagrouba's body.
Today, we are supporting Professor Mahdi Zagrouba, who was tortured in Elowina Police Detention Center and at his detention center in Buchucha. Despite this, the public prosecution has not taken any action to open an investigation against the perpetrators. We will track them down and file the necessary complaints because this is our right, the right of Mahdi Zagrouba, the right of Tunisian lawyers, and the right of Tunisian men and women.
The Tunisian government has rubbished these allegations. In fact, President Saied defended the arrests, saying that they were well within Tunisia's law. Reports say many of these arrests came under Decree 54, which was ratified by Saied in 2022. While the government says the law is meant to fight fake news, critics say it is used to crack down on dissent.
Today, we have had enough of the intimidation and judicial repercussions. The number of files opened and published for the sake of a statement, a word, or an opinion is unacceptable in our country, which we dreamed would be a country of freedom and democracy.
The United Nations has denounced the arrest and intimidation of lawyers, saying that the government's action undermines the rule of law in the North African nation. The European Union also asked for clarifications from the government. Meanwhile, the United States said that the detentions breach the constitutional rights of the citizens. Tunisian President Kais Saied rejected the West's criticism. He called these comments an interference by Western nations. The Tunisian Foreign Ministry said, and I quote, "We strongly object to them. What they are doing is a blatant interference in our internal affairs." The Tunisian president has asked the foreign ministry to summon the ambassadors of the countries. Tunisia's government has rebuffed Western criticism, retorting that Tunisia is an independent state. President Sayed, who came to power in 2019, ends his term this year. But ever since assuming power, he has made some very controversial rulings. This includes shutting down the parliament in 2021, and now, as Tunisia spirals into political crisis, citizens are demanding a new date for the country's presidential elections, fearing the return of an authoritarian rule. And finally, to our special segment, Resurgent Africa. Amid the coups and the crises, there are many positive stories from Africa that often get overlooked, but not on this show. Now, our final story is from South Africa, wherein African penguins are facing the threat of extinction. Humans have become their biggest enemies as climate change threatens their colonies. However, conservationists have decided to fight for these penguins, and they are taking the right to life for these birds to court. Our next report gets you all the details.
Look at these adorable creatures rolling on the rocky shores of South Africa. These penguins hop around the water and call one another in short, raspy barks. African penguins live in 7 colonies along the southwestern coastline of Africa. These gorgeous birds attract numerous spectators from across the globe. However, they seem unfazed by the people taking their pictures as they preen in the sunlight or watch over their eggs. But these species are at the risk of facing extinction. And experts say that this risk could turn into a reality in close to a decade's time. There are only 8,750 breeding pairs of African penguins left. If nothing is done to save them, their entire species could vanish by 2035. Penguins are vulnerable to natural predators like seals and certain types of gull. But their real enemies continue to be human beings as climate change threatens their existence. Storms and flooding endanger their colonies. And with the shifting ocean currents and temperatures, it becomes hard for the birds to access food. Penguins depend on sardines and anchovies. Both of these fishes are also a valuable commodity for the commercial fishing industry. The South African government has tried to restrict fishing activities. The noise and pollution from the shipping routes also add to the penguins' woes. But restricting fishing is a volatile issue. Over the last 15 years, there have been experimental closures of fishing grounds. The restrictions have cost the industry millions of dollars and hundreds of jobs. But that hasn't done much to save the birds. So conservationists have launched campaigns to save the African penguins. BirdLife South Africa and the South African Foundation for the Conservation of Coastal Birds have come together to protect these birds. The organizations are taking legal action against the South African government. The case is a first of its kind in South Africa. They claim that the lawmakers have failed to adequately protect the endangered species. The organizations argue that the government's fishing restrictions are neither extensive nor enough to protect the penguins. They are now demanding meaningful and immediate implementation of restrictions. The journey ahead could be long and painful, but conservationists in South Africa are not ready to give up. The clock is ticking. So they are pushing hard to ensure that these birds are a part of our future and don't become history.
And that's it on the show for today. We will see you again on Monday at the same time. Thank you for watching. Have a great weekend and goodbye.